Today, I'd like to do something a little bit different. I am going to do a solar return forecast for the United States because if you don't know, the United States just celebrated its birthday. Its solar return was only yesterday, which is the 9th. Today's the 10th as of the time I'm recording this. But before we look at the upcoming year, I do want to touch on a few things in the United States natal chart. Hopefully, if you're a United States citizen, you know that the United States was born July 4th, 1776 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So this is what we're going to be looking at. And as we go through this, you will get, I'm just going to go through it briefly. I'm not going to go into too much detail. You will get a general sense of what it's like to get a natal reading with yours truly, if that's something you're interested in. My contact information will be in the video description. Some of you are already aware of what my readings are like, so this will not come as much of a surprise to you, but for everyone else, give you an idea. The reason why we are looking at the natal chart prior to doing the solar return is because everything affects you differently depending on where all of your planets and points and everything are in the sky at the time you were born. And in this case, when the United States was born, the point on the eastern horizon was right here. You can see over here in the tail of the snake being wrestled by Ophiuchus. Now, originally, this constellation represented a figure called Nero, and he was an underworld deity, although that sounds bad. There was no negative connotation in there. He, in all likelihood, had these snakes for legs, and as this got transmitted over to Greece, this figure Ophiuchus, he lost his legs. We never really had any to begin with, but the snakes in particular are still used around the world as a symbol of medicine and healing. What this tells us in relation to the United States is the United States is supposed to be a force of healing. It is a karmic force that is in relation to its people, to the other countries, and who knows what else is going on in here spiritually. It's a lot to unpack for an entire country and population and how the country came about and all of these different things. We won't get in too much into the political side of it because that's a rabbit hole. And you definitely don't care about that right now. And why are we using the eastern point? You may be thinking, this is not the ecliptic. If you don't know, the ecliptic is the path that the sun takes as it travels through the sky, which is right through here, through these constellations. Technically, the Sumerians did use this point of the sky, the eastern point, as being very significant. This was the cattle pen or the sheepfold. It was a microcosmic representation of the entire sky at large. So if anybody tells you that the ascendant is a Greek invention, that is incorrect. Now, when we do look at the ecliptic, as you can see, the constellation rising at the time the United States was born was Scorpio. Antares, in particular, is going to be especially dominant, and this is right out of the gate. Antares was known as the Lisi star, and obviously was associated with the goddess Lisi, and she was known as the lamenting goddess. She was known to be able to soothe the hearts of the angry deities. She was beseeched for success and protection, and generally in relation to funerals and braziers. But we also want to take a look at the constellation of Scorpio, which is clearly very dominant here, both above and below the horizon. What this is going to mean is that the way it starts out is the way it's supposed to end up. It is its purpose. So at any point, if the country deviates from the original makeup, it will at some point come full circle. So that's good news. In Mesopotamia, the scorpion was a protective symbol. Scorpion men protected the gates to temples and sacred areas. They clearly were dressed like little warriors with their little armor. And so ancient people saw them as being very protective in general. They were nomadic, biologically speaking, not necessarily in mythology. They are one of the only arachnids that gives birth to live young. They are pretty good mothers. And if you search YouTube, you will find evidence of this, but they are still nomadic. They will hunt. They are not particular. I'm sure this varies by subspecies, but they're not particularly aggressive. Their stinger is mostly used for hunting and protecting themselves. The claws are used to shovel food into their face. And so there's definitely some shoveling of food and gathering of resources mixed in with the meaning and energy of the constellation of Scorpio. This is a very, if not the most adventurous of all of the constellations. Thus, for the United States of America, they are meant to be adventurous. I did not say imperialist. Said adventurous. Move into uncharted waters, which we know with the United States Constitution, that was definitely something new in human history. So definitely breaking some barriers. Now, if you have a Scorpio ascendant, this also obviously applies to you. You're going to be breaking some barriers in your lifetime too. Not meant to be aggressive, definitely meant to be protective. Can this become aggressive? Yes, absolutely it can. And I'm sure all of you strong Scorpio people out there know what I'm talking about. You just want to live and let live and protect your family. There are times when you can do some damage if those around you aren't careful, or if you're not taking care of yourself, that can also do it. So yes, this can be a very aggressive ascendant. Saturn in Virgo, this close to Spica, this is a wealth placement. The United States was meant to become a very wealthy country. And if you have Saturn anywhere in Virgo, you are likely also meant to be very wealthy, especially this close to Spica. Also very healthy. Again, if you are in the United States, you know anything about the United States, I say we're like I'm there, but definitely teetering on the brink here. But the good news is there's always an option to come back to itself and its source and its roots. Saturn in Virgo definitely makes for a great deal of independence, personal freedom, self-reliance. The Sun in Gemini, Gemini is extremely empathic. This is making family members out of friends, essentially, if I'm summing it up. In relation to the Sun, we're looking at, on the one hand, how we are going to be disseminating justice. The Sun was very much associated with justice. This could result in some nepotism, in some making really strong, close alliances. We know from experience that the United States does have its allies. In particular, seems to be leading many of its allies. And again, if you have your Sun in Gemini, these things are going to apply to you too. This can be a really good financial placement, especially with the Saturn in Virgo. It can result in some very serious bias though, and a lack of treating all allies by the same rules or with the same rule book. It can just depend. Jupiter's also here. This is how you are going to, if this is you, if we're talking about Jupiter in general, Jupiter is going to be how you are exercising your authority, your power, how you are projecting some of that. This is a lot of forming alliances. This can become emotionally manipulative, just depending on what else is going on. Again, I'm trying to cover all of the bases here because I'm generalizing an entire country with a lot of people. So I just want to make sure that all of the options are covered here. Venus is extremely sensitive, extremely empathic, in the most empathic of all of the constellations. This makes for, again, the potential to get one's feelings hurt, also having a lot of financial drain, a lot of people siphoning off of you. This close to Venus, however, we're probably not just going to be having the life sucked right out of us financially or physically. It's definitely going to go to a chosen select few and likely for reasons of our choice. Jupiter is very powerful, very protective, and this placement just allows for a little bit of self-reliance and self-protection. So it's not just going to totally take everything. Mars's placement here is really interesting. It is right here in between four very significant constellations. Without going into all of the detail, this is essentially a leadership, kingship placement. It's very masculine. It's very righteous, sometimes maybe self-righteous. The problem is that Mars is extremely sensitive. Mars gets its feelings hurt. Mars is very powerful. It's very vulnerable. Originally, it was the god of war, Nergal. He was the god of war, death, pestilence. He was not entirely bad or anything. He definitely provided a lot of blessings and protection, vanquishing of enemies and all of those things. He also enjoyed a very prominent romance in ancient mythology. So there's a lot going on in here, but in this context, we are igniting some of those fiery warlike traits, that desire to dominate. It's in here. I'm not saying that's what has to happen, but there's definitely a potential for it. Hopefully this isn't news to you, but the United States is in the habit in the last century of asserting its dominance in different places in the world. If they find some new oil deposits or somebody wants to get rid of the dollar as the reserve currency, then obviously those countries suddenly need some democracy. The good news is this close proximity to Taurus makes it start a little bit slower. It would have been much worse if Mars was even a little bit closer to the tip of the true shepherd of Anu, which was what this constellation originally was. It's not inherently good or bad, but there's definitely the potential for some ego, some retaliation, vindictiveness, things like that just beneath the surface. So it's in there. As for how the United States saw itself at the time of its birth, Aquarius is the constellation of the innovator. This is the artist, the writer, the communicator. They basically saw themselves as, or the United States, the founders, they basically saw themselves as the accumulation of what these older cultures, these democratic cultures or republics were trying to create. This is where they received their joy, where they got most of their fulfillment. And this is where the United States really thrives. So if ever the United States, if anybody out there is watching this, anybody cares, United States, I'm talking to you. If you want to really return to yourself, return to basics, this is it right here. Become the innovator, focus on science, technology, democracy, essentially your values. in the beginning. That's really all you got to do. Any deviation from those values will definitely not be great. So we got a nice balance in here. It's not terrible. As you can see here, I have the United States up here. This program is called Janus. You can get a 30-day free trial. I don't have like an affiliate link or something. That'd be great if I did, because I recommend it to everyone. This is actually, this program, just so you know, it's a very stripped down version of much of the commercial software that's out there, but it's phenomenal. It's great. My only complaint with it, and this is probably my own fault, it has nothing to do with the actual software. I believe there's a way to do it. I'm just apparently too lazy to go in and really try to figure it out. But as you can see here, I'm using the 30-degree division of the sky, which was developed in Babylon, and it's actually results in a lot of accuracy if you want to use it. But one of my only complaints is I personally don't know how to go in here and create my own house system, essentially with the actual placement of the constellations. So there are some programs that do it. I believe Prometheus does it, but it's just one minor little thing. And honestly, that's not even what I use this program for. What I use it for is more complex computations, like comparing different charts and everything. But I do like when I do my readings, can show people their aspects and things. And for the purposes of a solar return, seeing the aspects is actually pretty important. So we're going to take a look at that. With that said, where these constellations are right now is not quite as important, because we've already gone through these things, as what we're going to be looking at with some of the aspects and just the comparisons with the planets. I jumped back over so you can see this point. If I try to zoom into it, it's going to probably disappear on me. This is the United States South node, and over here, you can, come on, you can do it. See, it disappeared. I don't know why it disappears on me, but it is right over here. And come on, I don't know why it disappears. It might be my video card, I'm not sure. Over here in Cancer. Okay, so this is important, because what this is telling us is that the spiritual path that the United States is on started out as essentially trying to heal some old damage that had been done, to nurture, to give, to provide to its people, right? I did not say the native people, just to the people that it claimed. But the place that it's moving to is over here in Cancer. Now, this is a self-mastery placement, but when we look at this in relation to a country, it's moving toward self-mastery. That is definitely part of it. It's supposed to be a little bit more thoughtful and a little bit more, not isolated, but it's definitely supposed to do less intervening. And as time goes on, that may be the case. Now, I can't tell you, just based on this, how long the United States is going to be around, but I can tell you that if it doesn't follow this path appropriately, it will not be around. It will not last. This is the cosmic path that they're supposed to be on. So deviation from these things, from these natural abilities and traits and currents and all of this will definitely cause some problems for everyone. If you don't know how this works, when we're doing a predictive reading, generally speaking, if we're just doing like a 1-year forecast, we're going to take the solar return and we're going to compare that to the natal chart. Every year, the sun returns to the same place it was at the time you were born or the country was born. This is not based on the tilt of the earth, the tropical zodiac, none of those things. This is based on the literal placement of the planet in the constellation, which is Sidereal Astrology. And in the case of the United States, the sun was at 21 degrees of Gemini. One of the things that I like to do is look at my conjunctions. In my experience, when it comes to predictive astrology, conjunctions are definitely the way to go, followed by oppositions. And it really doesn't matter after that. We're just looking at the intense alignments, because again, we are looking at the echo of what the natal chart looked like. And those planets aren't there anymore, obviously, unless they literally are there. They might still be in the same position like the sun. The sun is in the same position it was at the time of birth. That's why it's a solar return. In this case, Mercury was in the same position too. But for the most part, these ones are just echoes. So what's happening is the planet passing over that point, creating a conjunction, allows for an activation of those energies. And it really does make a big difference. So this is the forecast for the upcoming year. Again, this is from July 4th, or in this case, July 9th to July 9th. If you're wondering why it's not on the exact date, because again, this was a few hundred years ago and the earth wobbles, the sun's moving, and that's why the tropical zodiac does not work anymore. And I will put a link to that up here if you guys want to check that out. Sagittarius is the constellation of success. The midheaven is the representation of the highest point in society that one is meant to achieve in this year. That is taking a very prominent place in the world overall, for better or worse. The good news with this is that the United States can achieve success in anything that it wants, but it must must do this intuitively, relatively, spiritually. Not sure how that's going to happen now, unless it happens from a grassroots perspective because of the separation of church and state. Obviously, it is a secular country at this point, although it was not intended to be that way at first. I'm not advocating for one religious group or another. I'm just saying, like, the United States, if it wants to be successful in whatever it's doing, it does need to come from a much purer place. We know this by the close proximity to the galactic center. It's not right next to it. It's within 20 degrees, but still, it's very close in the sky, and it's definitely worth doing. I do think, again, this was a trait that it had at its founding. This Saturn in relative close proximity, I will call this a conjunction. Every astrologer is a little bit different as far as how close the conjunction needs to be, what the orb is for it to have the impact. I think even within the same constellation, you're still getting a lot of the energetic interaction in there, but this is definitely well within the range here for this to be making a dent. So what's happening here with Saturn, this is career, this is thriving in the physical world, this is financial, but it's also physical. It can be the home, the family, again, the roots that we were talking about. As you can see, it's very close to the moon. Now, in this context, we are looking at the moon as a representation of the ego. This is definitely a make or break year for the United States. And basically, it goes back to that whole getting its feelings hurt. It needs to take a step back, a giant step back, calm down. Yes, I can and will do this for some of the other countries dealing with conflict right now in the world. I'll try to hit them around their birthdays though, just for fun. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. But basically what's going on here is there is a destabilization in the roots that we were talking about, the literal foundation of its existence. And the problem is the United States doesn't know who it is anymore. That's what's going on with the moon. The moon allows you to understand yourself. And as we talked about it with it being an Aquarius, it is this innovator, this artistic, philosophical powerhouse, or at least that's originally what it was. But as Saturn transits, right now it's in retrograde as it's moving back towards the moon. So it's been going back and forth here for a little bit. But in this case, in the solar return, what it's doing is some old karma is catching up with the United States. I'm not saying this, again, this doesn't, maybe some of it's good karma, maybe it's bad, I don't know. But definitely things are swinging back, and the United States has to get very real with itself and understand what it has been, what it is, what it wants to be moving forward. If it does not do this, if it remains unstable and lets the ego side of it just run wild, it's not going to be a good situation. Could this result in some sort of complete breakdown? Sure, it definitely could. You can tell from this trine between the moon and the solar return descendant, which is in Libra, and thus it's going to be obviously sextile with the ascendant. And this is a realignment. This is a realignment of the people, of the population, which we would get over here in Libra, also of the economy and the marketplace, again, over here in Libra. And generally this Aries energy, which pretty much we are getting a lot of the Tiamat side of the head of Ketis, this can be extremely chaotic. It's very creative, but it can be creative in a chaotic way. Now with Jupiter over here, is it going to take control of the chaos? Probably. It's probably going to use it to its advantage one way or another. Is it going to use it in its advantage to become what it originally was meant to be? Maybe. Is it going to use it to its advantage to tear itself down and rebuild something completely different? Yeah, that's a real possibility. However, we also know with this trine between Saturn and I keep calling it a natal chart. Technically, it's a mundane chart, but I'm just going to refer to it as a natal chart. So if that bothers you, I apologize. But we do know there's deep healing available here with this trine with Saturn and the natal Venus. It absolutely has the potential to completely avert disaster, right? Itself. It has it all laid out. It actually would not be that hard. What does this mean for the people in the United States? Do they play a role in this? Possibly. Some people do. I won't know if that's you without looking at your individual chart. So let me know if that's something you want me to do. This over here is basically just echoing what I was already saying. This moon conjunct with the Imam Cheli and thus in opposition to the midheaven. If you are ever getting a reading or you're doing your own reading or you're looking at things and you see the chart telling you the same thing in different ways in different places, this is like the most important thing your chart's trying to tell you. And this is the ego stuff. If the United States was my client, I would say, United States, you need to figure yourself out. You need to sit down. You need to do some meditation. You need to quiet your mind and you need to figure out who you are and what you want to be. Now, at the risk of getting my video taken down in my channel banned, which doesn't seem worth it for like the 200 people who are going to watch this, but I'm just going to say that all of these people right now in the United States in particular, of course, it's happening all over the West, not knowing who they are and going through a crisis of identity, essentially. This does not bode well at all for the United States. So I guess do your individual part, get real with yourself, figure yourself out and own that, whatever that may be, and decide who you want to be in the future and then really work to be that person. We see this again echoed with the solar return sun being conjunct with the Imam Cheli. The Imam Cheli, if you don't know, is like your deep dark center. It's the lowest point in the ecliptic at the time of birth or creating of said country. And this is who you are way down deep at your core. Now, this is obviously in the solar return. So this is this year, but this again shows us that the whole purpose of the year is to figure yourself out, and it has to happen immediately. Learn from your mistakes. We know that this is a learning year from the Mercury conjunction. Hopefully whatever mistakes we're learning from or experiences we're learning from, we don't have to deal with this again moving into the future. Now, in many respects, Mars is a very complicated planet. I did mention that it was very vulnerable, that it was related to Nergal, but in many ways it is the ego. Maybe not necessarily the cognitive side of the ego, the identity, but the emotional part of it. Again, this sextile here between Venus and the natal Mars does allow for some immediate and deep healing, but we got to get right with ourselves, right? I guess we can only do that as individuals. The vertex is like a fateful indicator. And this is right in between both the midheaven and Saturn. This is just showing us that the forces at work here in all of what's going on really relate to its place in society, its place in the wider world, in the global markets. All of that stuff's kind of up for grabs right now. Could definitely go way awry. We'll probably know here soon. I suspect we're going to know soon what's going on. Let's take a look at some of these upcoming transits. All right, I'm starting over here at July 4th. Now, if you ever have had predictive reading with me, you know that I do this. In my predictive readings, I also do it whenever there's time and somebody wants to know. But basically what's going on here, you're going to be able to see this over on the right-hand side. This is the actual date, and I'm just going to move this forward day by day. Now, we did remove the moon from the transits because the moon whips around here so fast that it's actually hard on the eyes, and it's hard to figure out what's going on because it's just busy. It just looks really busy. Now, if you want a daily forecast or even a monthly or anything smaller, you definitely want to know what the moon's doing. You can tell pretty much everything going on in your life on a moment-to-moment basis by tracking the moon. But some of the big ones, and I'm going to back up here because I know I'm like flying through this right now. Some of the big ones we're going to go through. If anybody tells you like, oh, I was able to predict the exact date of whatever, they are full of it. They are not doing the work necessary to go in and tell you exactly when the date of a wedding or a death or whatever was going to happen. Yes, you can do it. It is absolutely doable. But the amount of work that it requires to go in is immense. Don't worry about those dates. Okay. Nobody needs to know that stuff. You want to look at this more as a tool to help you and not a crutch and not psychotically obsess over everything that's happening to you on a moment-to-moment basis, which I realize coming from an astrologer, that probably seems counterintuitive. It's definitely not a good sales pitch, but nobody needs that. This is supposed to be a general tool to help you. These are the messages from the gods, so to speak, and it's here for your assistance, not for you to just totally not live your own life anymore. Okay. So I don't want you to have to do that. But I was saying, don't get too hung up on this date over here on the side. Just generally speaking, depending on how fast moving the outer planet is, we could be looking at a couple of days or even a couple of weeks or years, depending. Obviously, Pluto, Saturn, and Neptune move much slower, and the effects that they have on us, we feel those for a really long time. It's looking like probably the beginning of August is a particularly interesting time into the fall. This Mars conjunction first with Neptune and then with natal. These are the natal positions, obviously. And then natal Saturn. At the same time we have this natal Saturn, we also have a square with Venus. That's not great. I'm just going to be honest with you. So this is, again, this ego is getting in the way of our ability to survive and thrive here in the physical world. This can upset the markets. This can be just general life instability. And again, it's coming from the ego, from getting the feelings hurt, from this part, maybe not so much the personal identity, but we're already dealing with this the entire time Saturn is even remotely close. And obviously at this point, and by the end of September, it's going to be basically conjunct with this retrograde right over top of the moon, which is it's dangerous. It's not a good sign. Now, just so you know, when we're doing your personal individual chart, it's not usually this precarious, but you personally don't own nuclear weapons. So it's a little bit different. You're not dealing with trillions of dollars of debt and hundreds of millions of mouths to feed. So it's the stakes are not quite as high. We know right around the same time, we are dealing with this opposition with Neptune. This is going going to just intensify the Neptune energy. I don't think I've done a video on this in some of these predictive readings. I do use the outer planets, namely because they do have an influence on us, whether or not anybody knew about them in the past. And there is evidence, I'm not going to get into that today, that the ancient people knew about them, but they do influence us. Now, the meanings of these planets that I'm using have nothing to do with whatever you're going to find on the internet or some other astrologer told you. They're based specifically on me tracking the planets in relation to countless charts and determining what they actually do to us. So in this case, this Neptune energy, I'm just going to sum it up easily. We are looking at more Aquarius energy. This is definitely communication, innovation, technology. This is going to heighten some of that. So we know that solutions can come through communications, but also is there a potential for miscommunications? Not quite as bad. The opposition isn't scary. It's just a different type of alignment. This might actually be a good thing. This can open up diplomatic relations. So that can definitely be good. We do seem to be learning something. I say we, I'm just talking about the United States into October. So there's a listening and a speaking that's going on. We have this nice fluid exchange of these energies at the same time. So hopefully this is going to be a positive. I can't tell for sure, just based on this, if that's how things are going to go. Just being totally honest with you. Just so you know, there is no one planet that tells you about a nuclear war or a financial collapse or a revolution or any of those things. There is no planet. Anybody who tells you that there is, they are seriously misinformed or just outright lying to you. I don't know which one it is. As we go through here, we are getting some of this opposition with Jupiter. Now, honestly, the Jupiter transits aren't going to be quite as intense. Jupiter in this respect is going to result in some change, especially in the identity issues overall, and also our desire to listen as a country. We know with this Uranus opposition over here, and again, this is general because it doesn't have to be the exact degree, but we are putting a lot of time into listening, learning, and trying to figure this out. Now, we may be putting additional energy into all of these areas because there is an outcry from the people, or there may also be some sort of giant financial issue, which does relate to Libra, despite what you may have been told. And of course, that would obviously be out of necessity that these things have to happen. I suspect, just based on what I do know, and again, doesn't say this in here, but I suspect this November timeframe in here, we're looking at more election related things. This does relate more so to the people and to the group, and everything's over here in Libra. So that's definitely going to do that for us. Again, we see though into around the beginning of November, we do have this conjunction with transiting Venus and natal Neptune. It's also going to swing over, hopefully it's not going retrograde beforehand. It also is going to swing over this Saturn. This is going to allow for healing, for coming together, for diplomatic relations. Fingers crossed, right? Let's pray that's what's going on here. Definitely some opportunities more so into the winter, into January of next year, late January in particular, but I mean most of January. If you can see, we do have all these oppositions taking place between the transits of the second house and the natal eighth house. This will be a very interesting time period. A lot can happen, a lot of changes, a lot of growth, a lot of healing. Now, could this result in some chaos and this coming together and this unification is happening as a result of some of the chaos? Yes, it absolutely can. Do I see a catastrophe during this time period? Just the United States? Probably not. Just so you know, and this has been happening for a while, but both Venus and Mars are technically a goddess and god of war. And when they are together, they are very emotional, very sensitive. They can be very fun and very loving and exciting, especially if you are in a romantic relationship. This can result in a lot of chemistry with somebody. In relation to geopolitics, this isn't always a great situation. This is actually a pretty dangerous situation. Into the spring of next year, we're going to call this March, okay? These two planets, yes, they're not exactly next to each other, but they're still very close. They're going to swing over the natal moon. This is like a sink or swim moment, okay? And this is happening in March of next year. So we're praying. Some people are praying. I'm praying. Potential for partnerships, global partnerships in particular. June of next year, so close to the end of the solar return time period, seems to me looking a little bit better. We had our Venus return in June, and that's definitely a plus. And then we have a nice alignment here. They're within proximity, Venus, the moon, and the sun, right around, obviously, the solar return. Venus and Mercury are usually pretty close to the sun anyways, but I do think this is a positive setup, all things considered. Are we out of the water by this time next year? No, but we're definitely looking at a major shift. Based on everything that I'm seeing here, I suspect that it's actually in the people as like all us peasants down here, as opposed to the people at the top. But obviously the people have to make the shift first, and then they change out people at the top. There's elections around the November time period, local political and larger ones. Obviously, more people are going to start coming out for the 2024 election. I can't say for sure, just based on this chart, if there's going to be some big, massive escalation in the war. I would have to look at the parties that are involved. I suspect, based on this chart, though, that the United States has basically pushed itself right up to its limit and doesn't have a whole lot more to give other than the death throes, so to speak, which would be death for lots of people, possibly the entire planet. We don't know. So let's hope that's not happening. As far as making financial predictions, I don't think any predictions made before the fall, before the September timeframe, would really help anybody, because there's some upheaval that's coming after that. If you're wondering, like, oh, is this a good time to invest in anything at all? Personally, I really wouldn't, just based on this. I wouldn't get started. I don't think this is the best time. There's so much instability. It's probably going to get worse here. I think our big shift comes in the fall. And after that, I can make probably another assessment. If you remind me if that's something that you're interested in the future, or if you have questions about any particular company or country or any of those things that you want to see, I can do a video of. Feel free to pop it into the comments. I can let you know. If you're wondering why I can't make any exact predictions about what's coming up in the future, is because nobody can do that. Anybody who is telling you that's what they're doing, they, again, are either seriously misinformed about how astrology is supposed to work and does work, or they are just lying to you. I hope that it's the former and not the latter. The reason being, all of these things are energies. They are not inherently negative or positive. Yes, we have to look at them as a whole to get an idea of how things are moving, which is why transit reports, if you just isolate like a transit where you go online and you get a natal chart report, that's actually not very helpful, because you're getting a tiny portion of the information. The sky is meant to be looked at as a whole. And again, what these energies do to you can be different depending on what your natal makeup looks like. So the same transits affecting the United States this way right now may not be affecting other countries the same way. And it's the same thing for you as an individual. But the way I like to describe these different energies are, they are like ingredients for cooking. We have different spices, different ingredients. You get to decide what you want to make with those. The universe doesn't tell you exactly what you're supposed to do with them. It's like an actual Sumerian recipe or Babylonian recipe. I'll put some of those up here at some point because they're fun. They really just give you an ingredients list, and then you have to figure out what you're supposed to do from there, kind of just take a guess. And that's what your chart is telling you too. We're going to give you the basics, and then you get to decide what you want to do. That's probably good for now. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can get notified of the next video. I'm working so very hard on the Pleiades article. When that becomes a video, I will definitely put that up here. It will be an article on my website before it becomes a video. So if you want to get that before it even comes out, be sure to subscribe to my very rare newsletter. I've sent one in the last couple of years, so you're not going to be overwhelmed with emails from me. Okay, I'm going to go right now. I will see you soon.